Welcome to Reflections, the podcast that biblically encourages, equips, and empowers women for apostolic life and service. Here's your host, Dr. Cindy Miller.
Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk. And today we're going to be sharing about the healing path for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And as a reminder, we have some great resources in the notes section. So after the podcast, make sure you go there and check out the resources we've provided for you. My name is Cindy Miller, and I'm your host for Let's Talk, which is produced by Reflections Magazine. With me today is my very dear friend, Mary Booker. She is wife, mother, grandmother, and she serves in ministry with her husband, who is a pastor and the district superintendent of Wisconsin. And most important of all, she is an overcomer, and she's come to share her story of the healing path, the journey that she took in her adult years to become the person that God always intended for her to be. And I welcome you. I'm so glad you're here with me. And we had first talked about you sharing your story, being with me over a year ago, or right at a year ago.
Yes.
It seems like it's been a while, but I guess we were just waiting for Reflections to start this podcast, so it'd have a really great audience to hear the story, because what God has done in your life has just been so tremendous.
Yes.
So thankful that you're here. I was reviewing some things about this topic, and the statistic that's most often used for those who experience sexual abuse before the age of 18 is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. And so there was a recent study done, completed by the CDC, and it says 1 in 7 children experience abuse, childhood abuse, before the age of 18, and that's sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect in general. So these numbers are very disturbing,
Yes.
And it's really a call to the church of how we're going to be aware and what are we going to do with the awareness, because I don't think we're living in a cave. We know all around us. You can't hardly have conversations or go to a conference where there's not a call for healing, that women are not surging to the front saying something bad happened, I need help. But before we get into it, I do want to remind the viewer, if at any time during this podcast you feel triggered in any way, do not try to handle it alone. You need to call a friend, a family member, your pastor, your doctor, or a counselor. And if you feel like your thoughts are very overwhelming because of the trigger, at some point you may need to call 911 or take yourself to an emergency room. And if that's what you need to do, please do so, because we want you to be safe throughout this podcast. So the focus today is on healing, thriving, overcoming. And so I have asked you to come to share your incredible story, and I want you to share to the level that you feel safe, but why don't you just start by telling us your personal experience?
Okay, so I would say it started when I was about 33 years old. And it was a Wednesday night Bible study, and I came home from it, and my husband could tell I was upset. And he said, "You're upset?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, let's get the kids to bed, and then we'll talk about it." And so we got the kids to bed, and so he said, "Tell me what happened." And I can't even tell you what happened. It wasn't that major of a deal. And he said, "Well, I can see why you're upset, but I can see why you would be upset." He said, "But you're not just upset, you're angry." And I said, "I am." I was like, I didn't even know how deep, how strong my emotions were. And he said, "Mary, you're angry all the time." I am. It was like eye-opening to me. I was not even aware of how I was dealing with life. And so I said to him, "Why am I angry?" And he said, "I have no idea why. I think you're going to have to ask God." And so I began, why am I angry? Why does everything make me angry? The least little thing make me angry. And it was prayer and fasting. And the Lord didn't open this door just easily. It was something that I had to press on, because I had suppressed it for so many years and had done so well at suppressing it that having it come back up was that was something in itself. And I remember the day when God brought two memories to me on a Saturday. And I called my husband. He was already at church studying for Sunday. And I said, I know why I'm angry. And I told him my memories. And he said, he said, wow. I said, do you know what I want to do about it? I'm going to tell you. I want to get on a plane right now, and I want to go to Florida, and I want to find that grave, and I want to stomp on it, and I want to spit on it, and I'm so angry with him. And then I want to get on a plane, and I want to fly to Detroit, and I want to get on that front porch of my other grandparents, and I want to declare to the whole neighborhood who lives here and what they did. And he said, well, I'm glad I'm at church. And he said, I'm glad we don't have money for those 2 plane tickets. Yeah. He said, number one, if you would have found the cemetery and no one saw you stomping out there, you made it through that and you got on the plane and went to Detroit, they for sure would call the police and they'd put you in a straitjacket. He said, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. And so I was okay. So what did I know to do was forgiveness. I mean, that's what the church teaches is forgiveness. So, okay, I have these 2 memories. I need to forgive. And so I prayed, God, help me forgive, help me forgive.
So let me just interrupt. So your 2 memories, your first 2 memories, when they came out, and you don't have to share, but when you had this memory, was it of physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and how old were you at the time?
I'm going to say it was 7 or 8. And we were at my mother's parents' house. My sister and I have a sister a year younger than me. And I just remember wandering all over outside. I'm wandering. They had a 2-story home. Every place that we played, I can't find her. And I come in, my grandma's making lunch, and I can't find Leah. I can't find Leah. And she told me not to bother her or that she was cooking lunch. And I finally just go upstairs because that's where we spent the night. And she's in bed with my grandfather. And she's laughing, and what are you doing? And he said, we're playing a game. And I said, can I play with you? No, you can't play with us. And why are your pants off? Why are they over that chair? And he said, because I don't want my belt buckle to hurt your sister. And get out of here and go back downstairs. So I did. And when I came downstairs, my grandma was meeting me at the bottom of the stairs, and I said, they're upstairs and Leah's in bed with Grandpa. And she started screaming at me, just that I was a liar, I wasn't telling the truth, that nothing like that would ever happen in this family. And as she's screaming, you can hear upstairs the rustling and the movement, and pretty soon they come downstairs. And my grandfather's not put together. He is not, but there's my sister. And she stopped screaming at me and said, see, he has his pants on, his belt is buckled, and then he started screaming at my sister. She did, I should say, and that she was a naughty little girl, that there were no bad men in the world, there was just naughty little girls. And if it wasn't for naughty girls, there would be no bad men.
So this was your first memory that started surfacing?
Yes.
Okay. And I know it's so hard to talk about the past, but thank you for sharing that. That's tough. So as God began to reveal to you other memories, like you were talking about, okay, so I have to forgive all of this. That's what the church teaches. Yes. So how did you start? Like, I have all these memories coming to me. I have to forgive. And what kind of work were you doing? What was God calling you to at that point?
Well, at that point, the only one that knew was my husband. I had talked to my sister and said, do you have this memory? Because the memory is her, it's not me. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, don't you remember that church service I told you I went to? She said, I never sit in the front row, but I was in the front row. And it was a woman ministering, and she came down, and she laid her hands on me and rebuked all haunting memories from me. And she said, remember? Yeah, I remember you. She said, and I said at the time, what haunting memories could I possibly have? And I said, she was stuffing it as well as I was. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't know. She said, this is a haunting memory, and I don't have it because God healed me. And I was like, oh, isn't that wonderful? He heals you but not me. And I have to go through the process. So during this time, I'm praying, I'm reading the Bible, I'm claiming scriptures, I'm memorizing, I'm claiming,
Because you're a pastor's wife. I mean,
yeah, you got to fulfill a
You're in
role.
ministry.
You're supposed to go and help everyone at church,
right.
and be
You
a mom,
you
be
gotta
a
be
wife.
the answer woman here.
Yes, be in the neighborhood and witness to people, and I'm dealing with this. And then a family reunion came up, and so I went to the family reunion, and I have 2 sisters. One is a year younger, and one is 10 years younger, and she had 3 children, and she had 3 kids in 4 years, and she was pretty overwhelmed. Her husband wasn't there, and the one was acting out. And I'm just watching. You'd think I would help, but I'm still in such, I'm like there but not present. And she took her second daughter and put him on the lap of my grandfather. And when she did that, I went, I mean, I did it out loud. We were under a pavilion. I acted out, if you would say I did that.
Yeah,
yes.
a trigger happened.
And everything paused. No one spoke. No one moved. It was all of a sudden, then everyone started moving and talking again. And my husband came up to me and he said, "This is not going to end well for you. We got to get out of here." And I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." He said, "No, this is not going to end well. Where is your purse?" "My purse is over there." He said, "Go get your purse. The kids are over here at the playground. I'm going to go get the kids at the playground. We're going to meet you at the car. The car's there. Go to the car." And we made it till the car, till my grandfather noticed we were at the car, and he started hollering at us, and families hollering at us, and we're, bye, we got to go. We get in the car, we leave. And my husband gets us to the hotel, and we get the kids something to eat, and we got them eating. We have 2 children at the time. And he said, "We're just in this hotel room. There's no way we can talk about what happened today. I have to preach twice tomorrow. We're going to go home on Monday." He said, "We're going to drive home. We're not going to talk about it. But I'm telling you, do not stuff this. You have done this so well. You have to stop stuffing." And so
Sounds like he's your biggest supporter.
he was, I wouldn't have made it through without him. I knew I needed, he, sometimes it makes me upset because I tell him he's living on Mercy Boulevard, but he's merciful with everyone, and he's kind, and he takes time for everyone. So we got home and we talked about it, and he said, "You are not dealing with this well on your own. If I get you a Christian counselor, will you promise me that you will hold nothing back?" "Sure." "You get me a Christian counselor?" "Sure. I've tried my way, which I thought was what I was doing was right, and I am not moving forward." And the first session with the counselor was amazing. He had me tell my story of my sister, and then my second memory of my other grandfather trying to molest me and my grandmother stopping him. And so, and she only stopped him by saying, "If you do anything to her, you know she's Everett's favorite and he'll kill you." That was how she stopped him. So it wasn't to protect me, it was more to protect him, I feel. But when I told him the story, and he said, "So tell me about this grandma." And so I'm in glowing reports talking about grandma. And he said, "No, I don't think so. You don't like her." And I'm like, "Why would you say I don't like her? Did you not just hear what I said about her?" And he said, "Yes, I heard what you said what the family line is, but I heard what you said about her in your story. And you're holding her accountable because she did not protect you from what happened that day." And that is when I'd say the healing began, because I had tried so hard this way, but I really had to do this thing that on my own, I would never have figured that out without a counselor. And so the counselor said, "You have to do, there's some things you need to do here. You're only remembering this as a child. Now I'm asking you to go back in as an adult." The second thing he said is, "You have to become, you are the watchwoman now. You're going to have to call everyone in your family before you even begin healing. Anyone that has a young daughter, you're going to have to call them and protect them. Tell them what he did to you and what he did to your sister, and protect them from them.
Okay.
So he told me I had to be the watchwoman on the wall, and I was going to have to call. So I had only a brother with daughters, and it just so happened to be where my grandparents were going to church was their pastor's wife was a very dear friend, and I called her. I would say the greatest blessings to me was when I told my husband he believed me, and when I called this friend, she believed me. And she said, I totally believe you because what he's doing to a girl in our church, and I see what he's from your story, and she protected that girl. So I did what he asked me to do. So walking back into it, remembering it, I really resisted that because I felt like I've already lived through it. Why do I have to go back and do all this? Isn't it enough just to live and survive? And so I fought. And I fought and fought. And so it was eventually, well, you're not getting anywhere this way. And I knew it had affected my marriage, and I knew it more than likely had affected my children, but I wanted to limit. And so they were the ones, it was really my children, were the ones that pushed me to deal with things and heal with things. And so I worked through it. I labeled everything. I grieved. I forgave. And I remember coming out saying, good, that's done. I'm over with that. We're healed.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes. And I declared it, and then I had another memory. And then the counselor's like, you got to go back in and do this. And I would say for the first 3 to 4 memories, I fought. And then I did it with, all right, here we are. We might as well just do the process, just get through it. I would say I compared it to, I would tell my husband, I feel like I'm playing the game of Monopoly. Every property I land on is costing me money, but I feel like I have enough money in the bank. It's a real weird feeling, but I'm upset because I'm never passing go and I'm never collecting that extra $200. I don't feel like I'm getting ahead. And so it was just, all right, this is where we're at. This is what we're going to do. We're going to just process through it. And I remember it was just another memory, just another process, like healing. And when I came out of that one, I knew I was healed.
So one memory at a time, one trigger at a time.
And it was years. Sometimes there was a month in between memories. Sometimes there were years, and you think you're done. And then but I knew at the last one, it was like, there's nothing else there that I need to work on. And that's when I realized that I was getting ahead. The only reason I had a new memory was because I had dealt with the other one. So with dealing with the other one, I could process to the next one. So I was getting ahead. It just didn't feel like I was getting ahead.
And I think that's important for people to remember. Like, this is going to take some time. It's not just a one prayer meeting and we're done. It is the work. It is the walking on that healing path, the journey of healing.
I wish I would have known that. That would have been a very good help to me to know that.
Did you ever feel like a failure, like you weren't moving fast enough?
Oh, my goodness, yes. And why do I have to keep doing this? And why can't I just go somewhere and just be done with this and be over with this? It was just a real process, and trying not to let it bleed into my marriage, and trying not to let it bleed into my raising children,
protecting
and
them.
having them. So, I mean, I kept them away from the family members that were abusive, but I also knew that there were things, whatever I'm dealing with, they're going to deal with me dealing with what I'm dealing with.
So talk a little bit about forgiveness. You went through the forgiveness of grieving so that you were able to forgive. But then you said, I kept them away from family members. So talk about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, and when you know reconciliation is a good idea or it's not a good idea.
Okay, so that I got a lot from, so I would say our family was full of abusers, and for those that would cover, there were not protectors in my family. So I would go to different functions, but not if my grandparents were going to be there on my mother's side. My grandparents on my father's side, that had already passed away by the time I had children, so that was a non-issue. This is my mother's side of the family. And so if they were, I mean, if we had to be at something and they were there, I mean, my husband was as vigilant as I was and as protective as I was to keep our kids away. And so I got from different family members, my mom, my dad, aunts, uncles, that, you haven't forgiven. You haven't forgiven. If you can't go around them, you haven't forgiven. And so I said, this is where I'm at in life. And I feel my counselors decoded things. Like this like everyone knew this talk, but no one knew what the talk meant. And they were able to decode it and help me process it and deal with it righteously, because that was one of my prayers. I want to deal with this righteously. I want to be holy with this. I want to please God through this healing process. And so the counselor said, well, they're mixing and confusing forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is your responsibility. The Bible says we have to forgive to be forgiven, but reconciliation is on the one that is causing the problem. And so he would just say, just you'll know. And he didn't give me real guidelines on that, I would say. But I was reading in the Bible, which is a really good book to read.
Yes, it is. Very helpful.
And I read the prodigal. And when I read the prodigal, everything about that just opened up. And I think we focus always on the father accepting the prodigal. And that is wonderful when we have people come back to church or reconcile to us. But it was what the Lord was saying is the process, what the prodigal did. He came to himself. So they, as the person that has abused you, has to say what they did to you, how they harmed you, how it was wrong. And they have to say that they sinned against God. They have to say they sinned against you. And they have to come to the place where they are willing to say, I am no longer willing. I should no longer be called your grandfather. Mm-hmm. And I think when they can come to that place, when they're willing to take themselves out of the relationship that you naturally had with them, and they're willing to say, I am willing to be a servant. What does a servant do? A servant does whatever you tell them to do. Mm-hmm. They'll go and they'll do and they'll work and they'll have a good attitude and they'll do it well. And so when they can do that, I think that's the difference when you know yourself if you've forgiven. You know if you're harboring anything. But reconciliation is on them, and it's a very...
So the offender takes responsibility, and the offender recognizes, I did wrong, and I'm going to allow Mary to set the boundaries and to decide how I am going to be present in her life.
Yes.
And not resent that.
Yes. And so once they said that, and I went back to family things, and I just, you're confusing forgiveness and reconciliation. Now, they never asked for the steps of reconciliation. They never even wanted to deal with it. But they literally would turn and run away from me. They would leave me alone. And that's really, I would like the reconciliation, but if I can't have the reconciliation, please do not harass me with everything I've been through.
Yeah. So, just let you live in peace with your healing.
Yes. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, there's this quote. It says, we do not heal in isolation, but in community. And what I've heard is, first of all, you had this great support in your husband.
Yes.
And not everyone has a supportive spouse or friend, but thankfully you had that.
Yes.
You had friends. But let's talk a little bit about what would you say to pastors, church leaders, just members of the body of Christ? What can we do if we know someone is on this that has suffered, maybe the angry woman who's angry all the time, and then the Lord begins to reveal, how do we help people get on the healing path? How do we walk with them on the healing path?
I think you need to listen. I think you need to listen to the story. I had to tell my husband the story over and over. There was something therapeutic for me to until the point where I didn't need to tell this story anymore, and I would apologize. I need to talk about this again, and he would let me talk about it. So I'm thankful for that. He got me a counselor. I couldn't have done it without a counselor. But in all the craziness of all the abuse, my folks took us to an apostolic church, which I cannot balance all of that out. And I had 3 Sunday school teachers that made a difference. They just walked into my life and just said who they were and how they found God. And first one was Sister Emma, and she was a prayer warrior and a faster, and it was in children's church. And she's like, you got to pray. You just got to pray. You just got to tell God everything, and you just got to know sometimes it's going to be a battle. So I'm thankful that I knew that prayer was sometimes going to be a battle. My next one was Karen, Sister Karen, primary teacher, and she loved the Word of God. She would hold the Word of God, the Bible, up to herself, and this is our final authority. Every answer you need, you have a question, you have anything, it's in the Word of God. And so, okay, the Word of God is my final authority. And my senior high teacher was Sister Janine, and she was a worshiper. And she showed me by how she acted in church, but how she lived her life, how she worshiped. She also said, she talked about, in Sunday school, she one day just come in and started talking about drunks and dry drunks. And my grandfather was the drunk and my father was the dry drunk. And she said, if you keep your eyes on the drunk or on the dry drunk, that's all you're keeping your eyes on. You got to refocus and figure out which way you're going to take. And I remember thinking, oh, that's all I've been doing. I have to change. I have to do this. And so I would say teachers, Sunday school teachers, made a huge difference. Sister Janine also said, we have all these widows in our church, abnormal amount of widows, and they're all godly women, and they're women of prayer. Make one of them your friends. If you told me to do something, I went and did it. And so I felt the strongest prayer warrior of the widows. I made her my friend. And years later, I asked the Lord, how did I break chains? And he said, she broke chains for you. She did things for you. So as someone who would be hurt and a victim and have trouble trusting people, you do need to and listen to people. And when they give you things, it's going to be a process of working through it. The truth shall make you free, but it's a process. It's a long process. And you're going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable as you change, because it's very uncomfortable. It's very easy to live in that victim role. It's easy to get addicted even to sympathy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you have to say, I don't want to be labeled that. That's not who I am. I don't want to be that person.
It's allowing God to create a new identity.
Yes.
But it is hard work.
It
I mean,
is.
Everyone who's gone through it, that's what they say. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. It was easier to be miserable and stay the same.
Absolutely. It was a focus, a determination. I am going to overcome. I am going to be healed. I am going to someday look at this and say, that's in my past, but it's nothing of that is in my today. So I didn't want any of that in my today, and I didn't want it in my kids today.
Mm-hmm. They were your motivation.
Yes, they were.
Absolutely.
Yes, they were.
Well, our time is almost over, and you have given some great insight. But if someone was sitting here at the table and you had just a few minutes to offer last words of encouragement, support, advice, what would you say to someone who was right there at that starting point, trying to figure out how to get on the healing path, and maybe they don't have that strong spouse to say, I'm going to listen to your story over and over again, and I'm going to make sure you have a good counselor? What would you say to them?
I would say pray and ask God to bring someone into my life that will help me get to where I need to be. I look back and see that sometimes I didn't even know what I was looking for, but the Lord always knew what I was looking for, and he always brought someone to bring me to the next level. It's the next step. He brought someone to me and gave me the information, and then it was working with the information that I was given.
Well, I think he heals one layer at a time.
Yes.
Like he knows when we're ready to start. And you were saying, well, I was in my 30s. Why wasn't it in my 20s? Why not when I was first married? Why, all these years? But it's like we have to arrive at a place. I think if we have all this insight and information, but we're not ready to do this hard work of heart work, he knows it's wasted. So I think he doesn't want us in turmoil, so he begins the process and heals us one layer at a time.
Yes, and
I love that about him.
I thought of one more thing. At first, I healed, and I didn't want to share. I didn't want anyone to know. We're just going to pretend it never happened. We're just going to go on with life. And something came up, and I shared. And I remember afterwards that I was healed in the sharing.
Yeah,
The opening
absolutely.
up healed me more. And I would say it's not fun, but in the sharing, there's more healing.
So did you feel like after you shared your story, were you struggling with like shame, or did you feel guilty for sharing your story? Did the enemy of our soul who tries to destroy us ever come back and try to beat you up for sharing your
Oh,
story?
yeah. I would say the first time I did it to a group of women in our church, I gave it my testimony. I would say I had a 3-week, I call it a 3-week drag. It was like, why in the world did I dig all that up again? Why are we talking about that? And I called a good friend that I'd known since Bible school, and I told her, I did this, and I can't believe this, and this is what I feel now. And she said, if you only have a 3-week drag, you're more healed than you know. She would just say encouraging things like that to me. So, and after I got over the drag, then the healing came. So it seemed like I had another thought, and I can't remember it. It sparked another thought, but I'm not remembering what it was.
Well, I think it's important to have a friend.
Yes.
Have this, like, you have to have a whole network of support, but we do have to learn to recognize that enemy voice that's trying to discourage us and make us believe a lie, and you're not good enough. People are going to look at you different now. All those things that he comes to say to us to try to cause us to shut our mouth and, cower in the corner and not really stay on that healing path.
Yes, I will say that after even the healing, I would have thoughts come back like, you didn't do this and you didn't do this. And I recognized it as, I called it a harassing spirit. I said, you are nothing more than a harassing spirit. I know I've worked through this. and I command you to leave me. A lot of times I felt even a spirit of like oppression or depression. I would be, I don't have any reason in the world to be sad, and I'm so sad. Oh, it's the enemy.
Yeah.
He's come at me again. And I just would rebuke him. And that too is a process. And he doesn't even come at me as much as he used to.
Just that decision, I'm not living this way.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I know this cannot be easy, sharing.
But you're a good friend.
We are good friends, aren't we? And I thank you for being with us, and I thank you to the viewers who joined us today. And I know sometimes us listening to stories is very difficult, but someone has to start the conversations. And just this conversation may be the open door. You've been thinking, I need to step through, I need help, I'm tired of living angry, I'm tired of living with the shame. And we're just here to encourage you, find a counselor. And again, in the notes section of the podcast, there's going to be a list of resources for you. Talk to somebody, find that good friend, and not someone who's just going to stroke you and agree with you, but someone who's going to really hold you accountable to continuing on that healing path. I hope that you are already a subscriber to Reflections Magazine. If not, please do subscribe, because the Let's Talk article that's going to come out is just going to continue this conversation and provide a little bit more on what we've already been touching on in the short time we have together. And in our last few seconds, I need to remind you to please, when you finish up this podcast, please go to the comment section and just talk about how this podcast has blessed you. Subscribe to our channel, like it, comment, share, do everything that will help us get this word out, because we feel like we have just shared something very valuable and precious with you today, and we want to share it with others. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time, God bless.